one camera, and a story that has no good answer. Somewhere in the dark waters off the Bahamas on the night of April 4th, a surveillance camera mounted on a private home at Lover Quarters Cay was pointed at a stretch of calm, shallow sea. It wasn't pointed there for this. It wasn't watching for anything specific. It was just there doing cameras do, recording. At 7:47 p.m. On April 4th, that camera picked up light activity at the position of a 46-foot sailboat called Soulmate. Then again at 12:27 a.m. on April 5th. And again at 12:32 a.m., just 5 minutes later. The man who owned that sailboat, Lynette Hooker, has given multiple accounts of where he was on that night, to police, to friends, in recorded phone calls, in public statements. In every single version of his story, not one of them places him anywhere near that boat at any of those 3 moments. That is not a small problem. That is the entire problem. His wife, Lynette Hooker, the woman he says fell into those waters, has not been found. And the camera? The camera doesn't care who's asking. It already did its job. The question is what it actually recorded and what that means for everyone still looking for Lynette. Let's start from the beginning. If you follow true crime and you want every update on this case the moment it drops, subscribe right now and hit the bell. This story is still moving. You do not want to miss what comes next. Before we dive in, where are you watching from tonight? Drop your city and state in the comments. Let's see how far this community reaches. To understand what that camera captured, you need to understand the layout of where all of this happened. The Bahamas, Elbow Cay, a place most Americans picture when they close their eyes and think of paradise, crystal water, white sand, postcard skies. It's the kind of place people go to disappear from their problems. It's not supposed to be the kind of place where a person just disappears. Brian and Lynette Hooker had been living aboard Soulmate, their 46-foot catch, for 4 years. That boat wasn't a vacation. It was their home, their life. Everything they owned floated with them. On the night in question, Soulmate was anchored at Aunt Pat's Bay, a sheltered cove on the inner southwestern tip of Elbow Cay. This is the calm side. The side facing the Sea of Abaco, not the open Atlantic, protected water. The kind of spot experienced sailors choose on purpose. Now look directly across the channel from Aunt Pat's Bay. About 1 mile of water, shallow, clear water. Boat captains who work those waters say you can see stingrays on the bottom from the surface. That's how clear it is. On the northeastern shore of that small residential island sits a private home. Mounted on that home, a security camera. Pointed northeast, directly across that 1 mile of open, unobstructed water. Directly at the position where Soulmate was anchored. The line of sight is clean. No islands in the way, no terrain blocking the view. Just water and a camera and a boat. That geography matters. Hold on to it. Slower pace here. Let each version of his story land. Avoid dramatizing. The facts are doing the work. Now here is what Lynette Hooker says happened that night. He and Lynette left the Abaco Inn dock sometime between 7 and 7:30 p.m. They were heading back to Soulmate by dinghy, an 8-foot inflatable boat with a small outboard engine. In calm conditions, that ride takes roughly 4 minutes. Conditions were not calm. Brian says wind gusts hit somewhere around 20-odd knots that evening. Choppy water. Reduced visibility. Not ideal for a dinghy ride, but experienced liveaboards make those calls all the time. He says Lynette went into the water approximately 1,000 yards from Soulmate. He says he never made it back to the boat. He says he drifted alone through the night. Engine dead, no way to steer, no way to control where he was going. He drifted until he washed up at the Marsh Harbor boatyard at 4 in the morning. That is the core of his account. But here's the thing about Lynette Hooker's story. There isn't just one version of it. There's the version he gave police. The version from a Facebook post he published before any charges were filed, describing a heartbreaking accident in unpredictable seas. The version from recorded phone calls reviewed by CBS News, where he mentions details like the dinghy's safety lanyard going over with Lynette, a spare key in her drive bag, an anchor thrown, an oar lost, the moon not yet risen. And then there are the private messages Brian sent to his friend Daniel Danforth, also reviewed by CBS News. In those messages, the framing shifts. In those messages, Lynette swam back towards Soulmate rather than being swept out to sea. Danforth later told reporters that version differed from how the disappearance was being described publicly. These accounts aren't wildly contradictory. People retell traumatic events differently depending on the audience. Tone shifts, details shift. That is human. But here's what is also human. Every single one of those versions, police, Facebook phone calls, private message, shares one consistent detail. Nobody was on Soulmate after they left for that dinghy ride. Not Brian, not Lynette, nobody. The camera recorded light at Soulmate 3 separate times. Those 2 facts cannot both be true. Let's talk about the first timestamp, 7:47 p.m., April 4th. This is the most defensible of the 3. Not easy to dismiss, but the most arguable. At 7:47 p.m., there's still transitional light. The camera is adjusting from day to night exposure. The footage at that hour is its grainiest. Analysts and investigators understand those limitations. A defense case can be built. Maybe it's a reflection off the hull. Maybe a passing navigation lamp the camera misregistered as a fixed light. Maybe the last horizontal sun catching a piece of metal at exactly the wrong angle. Taken in isolation? Each of those explanations is at least imaginable. Now add the second piece of information from that same evening, around 8 p.m. Roughly 15 minutes after the 747 camera event, a flare was reported near Soulmate. Stop right there. A flare is not a reflection. A flare is not a navigation lamp. A flare is not ambient light caught at a bad angle. A flare is a deliberate object. It requires a person to locate it, load it, hold it, and ignite it. An anchored sailboat with nobody on board does not send up a flare. So now consider the construction of what we actually have at 7:47 p.m. The camera records light at the boat. 15 minutes later, witnesses report a flare near that same boat. By Brian Hooker's own account in any version of it, neither he nor Lynette was anywhere near Soulmate at either moment. He was somewhere in the channel. She, by his account, was already in the water. There is one more number that belongs here. In a recorded phone call reviewed by CBS News, Brian stated that the sun had set roughly 10 minutes after Lynette went into the water. He used that detail to explain why visibility was poor, why he couldn't see her clearly. Run the math. The dinghy ride takes 4 minutes in calm conditions, longer in rough water. The sun sets within 10 minutes of Lynette going over. That puts the entire sequence Brian describes inside a window of roughly 15 to 20 minutes before full nautical darkness. The 7:47 camera event sits inside that window. So does the 8 flare report. 2 streams of activity, the same 15-minute window, separated by 1,000 yards of water, with no acknowledged connection between them. Once you have to account for the flare, the 7:47 camera event stops being a marginal question about image quality. It starts looking like the first signal in a sequence. Pause for just 1 second. If you find cases like this one important, hit that like button right now. It takes 2 seconds and it helps this channel keep covering stories that matter. Here's what we know so far. A camera recorded light on an empty boat. Witnesses saw a flare from that same boat, and the man who owned it says he was never there. That's 3 timestamps. We haven't even gotten to the worst ones yet. Now we get to the timestamps that remove every easy defense. 12:27 a.m. April 5th. This is not transitional light. This is not a camera adjusting from day to night. At 12:27 in the morning, there is no residual daylight, no sun on the horizon, no ambient glow. The camera is operating in its most reliable condition, calibrated for low-light recording, shooting in pure darkness against a black sea. Whatever produced the light event at 12:27 did so in conditions that offer absolutely no natural artifact as cover. The camera recorded light at the defined position of Soulmate. Now ask Brian Hooker where he was at 12:27 a.m. By his own account, the account on file with authorities, he had been adrift in a powerless dinghy for approximately 5 hours. Engine non-functional. Safety lanyard gone. Moon not yet risen. Alone on open water at the mercy of wind and tide. His account places him miles from Soulmate, hours from any shore. Here's the thing about wind and tide in the Sea of Abaco on a 20-knot night. They don't give you a return trip. A small, powerless vessel doesn't fight its way back upwind to a mooring. It goes where the weather sends it. If Brian's account of losing control is accurate, the dinghy went where conditions pushed it. And conditions on a windy night in those waters do not push a small, dead-engine craft back to its anchorage. Those 2 statements, the camera's record and Brian's account, cannot both be correct. And then, 5 minutes later at 12:32 a.m., the camera records light at the same position again. 5 minutes. 1 light event at midnight on an anchored sailboat. Maybe, in some theoretical scenario, you find an innocent explanation. A piece of equipment malfunctioning for 1 moment. A floating object drifting too close. Pick any low probability, single event explanation you want. 2 light events, 5 minutes apart, at the same defined position on the same boat. That is a structurally different problem. The probability of 2 completely unrelated coincidental causes producing the same kind of event at the same location inside that 5-minute window is not 0. But it is small enough that it shifts the burden of explanation entirely. Consider what a coincidental explanation would require. 2 completely separate actors, each independently choosing that same 5-minute window, in the dead of night, in a quiet residential bay with no expected vessel traffic. The far simpler reading is this. 1 continuous presence was at Soulmate at 12:27 and was still there at 12:32. Whatever was generating light at Soulmate was still there 5 minutes later. And in every version of Brian Hooker's account, police, attorneys, friends, recorded calls, he was not. This is the part that is hard to explain away. Brian Hooker's account of that night exists across multiple versions. Each version was told in a different setting, to a different audience, under different levels of pressure. To police, rough conditions, Lynette swept away. On Facebook before any charges were filed, a heartbreaking accident in unpredictable seas. In the recorded calls reviewed by CBS News, the safety lanyard going over with Lynette, the spare key in her dry bag, the anchor thrown, the oar lost, the moon not yet risen, and private messages to his friend Daniel Danforth, also reviewed by CBS, a framing where Lynette swam back towards Soulmate rather than being pushed out to sea. A detail Danforth later told reporters differed significantly from the public account. These versions are not identical. Accounts shift in tone, details shift in emphasis. That is what happens when a traumatic story gets retold over days and weeks and months. But here is what does not shift. Not one of those versions, the police account, the Facebook post, the recorded phone calls, the private messages, places Brian Hooker, Lynette Hooker, or anyone else on Soulmate at 7:47 p.m., at 12:27 a.m., or at 12:32 a.m. The camera is not in conflict with one specific version of the night. It is in conflict with all of them. At the same time, before the surveillance footage entered the public record, this case had a kind of rough symmetry. Brian's account on one side, the skepticism of experienced boat captains and inconsistencies in witness accounts on the other. Both sides filtered through human memory, human judgment, human interest. Both sides arguable. The camera changed that structure. It produced data. And data doesn't negotiate. It either matches an account or it does not. At three separate points, in conditions ranging from transitional light to the dead of night, it does not match. This channel covers cases like this one, real stories, real evidence, no filler. If that's what you're looking for, subscribe and share this video with someone who needs to hear about Lynette. Her name deserves to be known. What do you think so far? Do you believe Brian's account holds up against those three timestamps? Drop your thoughts, and the authorities executed a search warrant on Soulmate. Court documents reviewed by CBS News confirm the warrant authorized the removal of a digital video recorder, digital tablets, and mobile phone-related equipment and accessories. The stated justification, material evidence related to a missing person causing bodily harm. That is a precise legal phrase, and it points in a very specific direction. The camera on Lovers Quarters K gave investigators, and the public, what it could see from the outside, 1 mile across the water in the dark, recording light at a 46-foot sailboat at 3 moments nobody will account for. The seized devices may contain a different kind of record entirely. Activity logs, location data, message timestamps, and depending on what was actually running on that DVR aboard Soulmate that night, possibly footage from the inside. Think about what it means when those two records are placed side by side. The exterior camera records light at the boat at 12:27 a.m. If the DVR seized from the boat contains footage or data showing no activity at that same moment, that is a contradiction. If it confirms activity, that is confirmation. There is no third outcome. The two records either align or they don't. Whatever was happening at Soulmate during those three timestamps, the devices taken off that boat under a material evidence warrant may be the closest thing to an answer that exists. What those devices actually showed investigators, that is something the public record has not yet confirmed. But investigators now have them. And what a DVR knows about a night it recorded cannot hear is the current legal reality of this case. Brian Hooker has not been charged with any crime. The Bahamian Department of Public Prosecutions, in coordination with the Royal Bahamas Police Force, recommended that no charges be filed at this time, pending further investigation. That recommendation is not an exoneration. Understand what it actually is, a procedural posture. A decision that the evidence, as it currently stands, is not yet sufficient to sustain charges prosecutors feel confident bringing. The investigation is ongoing, the door is open. The Royal Bahamas Police Force has stated publicly that Brian Hooker remains a suspect. The U.S. Coast Guard has confirmed it is conducting its own criminal investigation. Brian has returned to the United States. He has retained 2 attorneys, Crystal Marie Hauer, based in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and his Bahamian attorney, Terrell Butler. Butler has stated that her client categorically and unequivocally denies any wrongdoing. Lynette Hooker remains missing. Search efforts have been downgraded from rescue to recovery, a shift in language that tells you everything about what searchers believe they will find. Anyone with information is asked to contact the Royal Bahamas Police Force or the U.S. Coast Guard directly. Her name is Lynette Hooker. She was a real person. The camera on Lovers Quarters K finished its work before anyone knew Lynette Hooker was missing. Its timestamps are fixed. They were fixed the moment they were recorded. They will not shift under pressure. They will not adjust depending on who is asking. They will not change based on what Brian Hooker's attorneys say or what a future court decides to believe. Whenever an investigator formally enters those timestamps into the record, they will be exactly what they are right now. 3 moments, 1 boat, an account that has no answer for any of them. The central question in this case has never really been about what kind of light the camera recorded. It has always been a narrower question, a harder question. What was at Soulmate at 7:47 p.m.? What was at Soulmate at 12:27 a.m.? What was still there 5 minutes later? And why does Brian Hooker's story, in every version of it, told to every person who asked, have no answer? Lynette Hooker was a real woman. She had a life. She had a home. It floated. She deserves more than a story that doesn't add up. If the next court filing, the next search update, or the next piece of evidence changes what we know about this case, you will want to be here for it. Subscribe now, share this video, and if Lynette's story moved you, leave a comment below. Let her name stay in the conversation. One last question before you go. What time is it where you are right now? And what's the weather like? Drop it below. I love knowing where this community is watching from.